On February 8, 2001, professional basketball quietly stopped in 10 American cities. There was no championship parade, no retirement ceremony, and no final buzzer worthy of a league that had survived for 55 years. There were only phone calls, overdue bills, and players wondering whether the next paycheck existed. 8 of the 10 teams in the Continental Basketball Association could not meet payroll. Some clubs did not know if they had enough money to travel to the next game. The season was suspended, and the official statement tried to make the disaster sound temporary. The teams, it said, would be returned to local ownership. But there was a problem. Most of the old local owners did not want them back. Some had already spent months asking where their money was. Others were looking for a different league before the CBA took them down with it. And the most famous owner in minor league basketball was no longer allowed to run the business. He was coaching the Indiana Pacers. His name was Isiah Thomas. 16 months earlier, Thomas had paid roughly $10 million for the entire CBA. 9 teams, the league office, its marketing company, and a relationship with the NBA that had taken decades to build. He did not buy one struggling franchise. He bought the road beneath the NBA, the place where unwanted players, unknown coaches, and overlooked referees tried to earn one more chance. Thomas promised to turn that road into an empire. He talked about hundreds of teams, new arenas, internet broadcasts, a women's league, and a true farm system resembling baseball. In several ways, he was describing the future of professional basketball years before that future arrived. Then he reportedly rejected an offer from the NBA to buy the league. He accepted a $20 million coaching contract. The CBA was placed in a blind trust. Months later, the money stopped. That sequence produced an easy verdict. Former executives said Isiah Thomas had ruined their league. Sports Illustrated later described a mountain of unpaid bills and nearly 4,000 creditors. To many people in Fort Wayne, La Crosse, Rockford, Yakima, and Sioux Falls, there was no mystery at all. A rich superstar had arrived with a famous smile, made impossible promises, and left for a better job before the damage became public. But the easy verdict hides an uncomfortable fact. The league Thomas imagined looks remarkably similar to the development system the NBA operates today. So what actually happened? Did Isiah Thomas destroy a 55-year-old institution? Did the NBA replace him after he refused to sell? Or did he recognize the correct future and then make every wrong decision required to reach it? Before answering that, we need to recover the league that disappeared from the official NBA story. Because the CBA was not a collection of weekend exhibition games. It was one of the most important backdoors in American basketball. And by 1999, that backdoor was valuable, unstable, and waiting for someone ambitious enough to believe he could own it. The Continental Basketball Association traced its history to 1946, the same year the Basketball Association of America, the league that became the NBA, began play. It started in Pennsylvania coal country, far from the glamour that eventually surrounded Madison Square Garden and the Forum in Los Angeles. The gyms were smaller, the buses were less comfortable, the pay was modest. But the basketball was professional, and for generations, the league offered a place to work after the NBA said no. By 1980, the connection had become official. The CBA served as the NBA's developmental league. An NBA team could summon a player on a 10-day contract, watch him against real professional competition, and decide whether he belonged. The CBA club received compensation, then returned to the same difficult task, finding and developing another player good enough to be taken away. That was the strange business model. Success could damage the product. If a player became popular in Sioux Falls or Albany, an NBA team might remove him in the middle of the season. If a coach proved he could manage professionals, a larger organization could hire him. The CBA was supposed to create talent it could not keep, but it created a great deal of it. Phil Jackson coached the Albany Patroons before becoming the man who won 11 NBA championships from the sideline. Rick Carlisle spent time with Albany as a player. John Starks and Anthony Mason passed through minor league basketball before becoming symbols of the 1990s Knicks. The CBA developed officials and front office personnel as well as players. In the 1997-98 NBA season, more than 100 former CBA players wore NBA uniforms. When Thomas completed his purchase the following year, the Associated Press reported that a record 63 players had been called up from the CBA during the previous season alone. 63 chances, 63 moments when an NBA team looked past the draft, past the guaranteed contracts, and into small American cities for help. The CBA was also where basketball careers became brutally honey-baked. In the NBA, a first-round pick could survive on potential. In the CBA, players fought for minutes while waiting for a telephone call that might never come. In 1998, the average salary was reported at about $30,000 a year. A player could be close enough to the NBA to see it and still be financially closer to the fans buying the cheapest seats. That made the league both desperate and useful. NBA scouts knew the men on the floor were playing for employment, not merely development. Local fans knew a star might disappear tomorrow. Coaches learned to rebuild rotations in the middle of a playoff race. This was basketball without the protection of fame, and it explains why the CBA mattered more than its television profile suggested. It was a filter, a repair shop, and an emergency supply line for the richest basketball league in the world. Yet the richer the NBA became, the more fragile its unofficial little brother appeared. The CBA could point to call-ups, careers, and 50 years of survival. It could not point to a stable national business. By the late 1990s, the league had discovered a cruel truth. Producing NBA talent did not guarantee that anyone would pay to watch the production line. That contradiction was already destroying teams before Isiah Thomas arrived. In 1998, the CBA looked alive. On a strong night in Grand Rapids, more than 8,000 people could enter Van Andel Arena. Families bought inexpensive tickets. Teams experimented with music, giveaways, luxury seating, and promotions copied from successful minor league baseball clubs. The average attendance across the CBA reached 3,809 per game, a league record. Then came the number hidden behind the celebration. The 9 surviving franchises had collectively lost more than $2 million in the season before Thomas bought them, according to Sports Illustrated. In the 2 years before the sale, 7 other franchises had folded. 3 financially troubled teams reportedly survived long enough to be included in the transaction, partly because people believed Isiah Thomas was coming. The record crowd was real. So was the emergency. This was not a new problem. The CBA had lost roughly $6 million during the 1996-97 season. Management then cut the loss to about $1 million the following year, an impressive improvement that still left the league losing money. More than 100 franchises had appeared and disappeared over the previous 2 decades. That history should have frightened any buyer. Local minor league basketball did not fail because Americans disliked the sport. It failed because enthusiasm was uneven and expenses were relentless. A packed building in Grand Rapids could not automatically rescue a weak gate in Connecticut. A popular team in Sioux Falls could not guarantee sponsorship money in Rockford. Every market depended on relationships with local businesses, arena operators, radio stations, and fans who recognized the people selling the tickets. The CBA's weakness was also its identity. It was not one national product. It was a collection of local survival stories sharing a schedule and a pipeline to the NBA. That meant its greatest asset was not a logo or a television contract. It was trust, the quiet network between each club and the people in its city. Isiah Thomas looked at that loose network and saw inefficiency. Why should dozens of owners and investors duplicate the same work? Why should 9 teams negotiate separately when one famous owner could sell the entire league to national sponsors? Why copy the NBA's star model when the CBA could become the baseball farm system of basketball? The logic was tempting. Thomas had a global name, business experience, relationships with players, and credibility inside the sport. He had been president of the Players' Union. He had helped build an expansion team in Toronto. He understood television. He could enter a sponsor's office in a way the owner of the Yakima Sun Kings could not. And he did not think like a caretaker. He thought like a man who had spent his entire career being told that someone else controlled the door. The CBA did not need another person to keep 9 fragile teams alive, Thomas believed. It needed someone willing to redesign professional basketball beneath the NBA. That was the opportunity. It was also the first mistake, because when Thomas purchased the CBA, he did not merely inherit its losses. He began removing the local structure that had allowed those losses to remain survivable. To understand why Isiah Thomas bought an entire league, it helps to remember what happened after he stopped playing. He retired from the Detroit Pistons in 1994 as a 2-time champion, a Finals Most Valuable Player, and one of the greatest point guards of his generation. He had spent his career directing larger men, controlling tempo, recognizing defenses, and forcing games toward the outcome he wanted. Retirement did not remove that appetite for control. Thomas joined the Toronto Raptors before the expansion team played its first game. He became part owner and the leading basketball executive. Toronto drafted Damon Stoudemire, Marcus Camby, and Tracy McGrady during his period with the organization. Thomas wanted a larger ownership position, but the ownership structure changed, and he left in late 1997. He moved into broadcasting with NBC. He had business interests outside basketball. He sat on corporate boards. He was famous enough to remain visible without accepting the daily humiliation of running a small sports property. But visibility was not ownership. According to Thomas, his interest in the CBA began when he considered placing a team in Detroit. Then the idea expanded. Why purchase a single franchise when the entire league was available? On August 3, 1999, reports announced that a group led by Thomas had agreed to buy the CBA. The transaction became official on October 7th. The reported price was roughly $10 million. About half was paid up front. The rest was structured through future payments to the former team owners. What did that money buy? 9 TMs. The league itself, its marketing and licensing arm, and the power to convert a complicated association with dozens of ownership interests into a single entity business. The public reaction was hopeful. The CBA commissioner praised Thomas's intelligence, energy, and business ability. An employee from one endangered club told Sports Illustrated that Isiah had saved the league. The famous name created instant momentum. Sponsors who might ignore a minor league executive returned calls from an NBA champion. Thomas described his name as a brand built on credibility, trust, and loyalty. That language sounds boastful now because we know what happened. In late 1999, however, it was not ridiculous. The CBA needed attention. Thomas could provide it in one press conference. He also brought an idea larger than rescue. He wanted the CBA to serve cities the NBA would never enter. He wanted to make professional basketball affordable and local. He wanted young players to develop in the United States rather than disappear overseas. He wanted coaches, officials, and executives to rise through a clear system. Those goals were not foolish. Most of them eventually became ordinary features of the NBA's own development league. But Thomas was buying a distressed business while speaking like the owner of a growing one. The difference would matter. Before he could build 300 teams, he needed 9 teams to pay their bills. Before he could sell a national vision, he needed to preserve the local relationships already producing revenue. Before he could become the NBA's partner, he needed to know whether the NBA wanted a partner at all. Thomas moved first on the part he understood best, the basketball. And for a brief period, his changes made him look like exactly the owner the CBA needed. Isiah Thomas did not spend his first months in the CBA hiding behind accountants. He changed the product. Players would follow a dress code. The postseason would use a single elimination format, creating the pressure of the NCAA tournament. The championship was positioned for the Sunday of Final Four weekend, an obvious attempt to catch basketball fans when national attention was already high. The most unusual change involved defense. The CBA restricted double teaming until the final 5 minutes of games. Thomas wanted higher scores, clearer individual matchups, and a better evaluation environment for NBA scouts. If the best scorer on the floor could attack one defender, a scout could judge his ability instead of watching him pass out of traps all night. Traditionalists could complain that Thomas was manufacturing offense, but he understood the business problem. The CBA rarely kept a recognizable star long enough to market him. If a future NBA player appeared for one night, the league needed that player to produce something memorable. Thomas also changed the labor cost. Contemporary reports said the average weekly salary fell from about $1,500 to $1,100, while top rookies could make $800. The former president of the NBA Players Union was now asking minor league players to absorb part of the turnaround. That contradiction would become more important later. For the moment, the early numbers offered encouragement. By February 2000, attendance and corporate sponsorship revenue were reportedly up about 10%. More than 40 cities had contacted Thomas about joining the league. He predicted a modest profit. This is where the story becomes more complicated than a simple tale of incompetence. Thomas did create momentum. His name attracted attention. His basketball ideas had logic. He understood that a minor league could not imitate the NBA and win. It needed faster games, affordable seats, local identity, and a visible route upward. He also understood something about media that sounded unusually modern in the year 2000. Thomas imagined games streamed through team websites. He invested in digital sports operations and talked about online highlights and direct interaction with fans long before streaming became normal. The ambition was not confined to a website. He wanted the CBA to become the central network for all professional basketball below the NBA. The United States Basketball League could be absorbed. The International Basketball Association could be absorbed. A territorial draft could keep players close to home. A young man who was not ready for the NBA could earn money, develop, and remain visible to scouts without leaving the country. Then Thomas said the number that revealed both the brilliance and danger of the plan. 300 TMs. Not 30, not 50, 300. He was attempting to transform 9 unstable clubs into the largest basketball system in the country. And for a few months, respectable people wondered whether he might actually do it. Thomas described the ambition as becoming the Microsoft of basketball. The phrase captured the moment. Technology companies were expanding at breathtaking speed. Investors rewarded scale. The internet seemed capable of turning any local business into a national platform. Thomas looked at small city gyms and imagined a connected network. There would be CBA 1, CBA 2, and CBA 3. A player might begin near home, climb to a stronger team, then reach the NBA. Coaches, referees, and executives could follow the same ladder. Thomas spoke about owning arenas in second- and third-tier cities, filling them with affordable entertainment, and connecting them through online broadcasts. He discussed a women's CBA. He planned an international tour in which CBA players would face clubs in Asia and the Middle East. He recruited NBA stars such as Chris Webber and Glenn Rice as possible investors in expansion franchises. He said more than 40 cities had expressed interest. Most important, he could see direct relationships with NBA teams. In one interview, Thomas imagined giving 29 clubs from his system to the 29 NBA franchises then in existence. That is close to the one-to-one affiliation model fans recognize today. Calling him a fool misses what happened next. In 2000, the NBA did not have a nationwide farm system resembling baseball. A teenager who wanted to become a professional faced a narrow set of choices. Thomas believed the CBA could pay young players, teach them the professional game, and create a genuine middle class of American basketball. He was not the first person in the CBA to imagine expansion or stronger NBA affiliations. League executives had pursued both before his arrival. What Thomas added was scale, celebrity, and urgency. But scale requires capital. It also requires patience. A 300-team vision is useful only if it attracts enough money to protect the first 9 TMs. Instead, Thomas began building an expensive national office around a local league. A later Sports Illustrated investigation reported that the league president received a salary of $250,000, roughly $100,000 more than his predecessor, plus a loan and possible bonus. Thomas installed 8 vice presidents at an average salary of $125,000. Only 3 were based in CBA cities. At the same time, players had seen weekly salaries reduced. Local team employees watched authority move toward Phoenix. National sponsors were expected to replace local relationships, but the major deals did not arrive at the necessary scale. There was a television agreement with BET, yet the reported economics were modest, a limited package of games at approximately $20,000 per telecast. The CBA could appear on national television without national television solving its bills. Thomas was attempting to enlarge the roof while the foundation remained wet. And across the table, David Stern's NBA was studying the same market. The CBA owner believed the NBA needed what he had bought. The NBA was beginning to ask a different question. Why buy Isiah Thomas's future if it could build its own? The relationship between the NBA and CBA had always contained tension. The NBA needed a place to find emergency players and develop talent. The CBA needed money, call-up fees, legitimacy, and the promise that its best performers could move upward. Each league benefited, but only one controlled the future of professional basketball. In October 1999, only days after the CBA sale became official, Commissioner David Stern publicly said the NBA needed a domestic minor league system before expanding similar efforts overseas. He left 2 possibilities open: deepen the relationship with the CBA or begin a new league within roughly a year to 18 months. That statement should have sounded like an opportunity and a threat. Thomas had purchased the existing system. If the NBA chose partnership, his $10 million investment could become extraordinarily valuable. If the NBA chose competition, the CBA could lose the relationship that made it more than another independent minor league. By February 2000, the danger was visible. The NBA created a senior position devoted to new league development. Sports Business Journal reported plans for a North American men's minor league to begin in the fall of 2001. A contemporary Sports Illustrated article warned that such a move would be disastrous for Thomas's CBA. The warning was correct. The CBA did not merely compete for fans, it sold proximity to the NBA. Every call-up told a player that the system worked. Every scout in a small arena made a ticket feel connected to the major league. Remove that pipeline, and the CBA would still have basketball, but it would lose its strongest reason to exist. There was another layer. Control of a developmental league carried labor power. The NBA and the National Basketball Players Association had recently survived a damaging lockout. In a future labor dispute, ownership of the main alternative professional league could matter. Reports at the time said both the NBA and the Players Union had reasons to want influence over the CBA. Thomas was not negotiating with an ordinary buyer. He was positioned between the league, whose cooperation gave his asset value, and the union whose members he once represented. This was the moment to secure the relationship, reduce the risk, and turn his vision into a protected partnership. The NBA made an offer. The amount became another argument. Thomas later said it was $11 million. NBA Deputy Commissioner Russ Granick said it was lower, but still enough to make Thomas whole on the original purchase. The reporting points to the same decision. Thomas had a path to recover his investment, preserve some upside, and place the development system inside the NBA. He said no. Why? Later reporting said advisors valued the CBA at $20 to $30 million. From Thomas's position, the NBA was trying to buy the future cheaply, just as attendance, sponsorship, and expansion interest appeared to be rising. A man who had spent his career refusing to yield chose control over the exit. The decision mattered more than the private motive. Thomas rejected the offer. The NBA continued building its own league, and then an NBA job arrived that made owning the CBA almost impossible. In the summer of 2000, the Indiana Pacers needed a coach. Larry Bird had just taken the franchise to the NBA Finals and stepped away. The roster had Reggie Miller, young talent, and championship expectations. For Thomas, who had won a college title at Indiana University and wanted to return to the bench, the opportunity was personal and prestigious. The reported contract was 4 years and $20 million. It also carried a condition. An NBA head coach could not control the league supplying players to NBA teams. The conflict was obvious. Thomas could know every CBA contract, influence every assignment, and potentially direct talent toward Indiana. The NBA required him to divest. The CBA suddenly changed from his grand project into an obstacle between him and a dream job. Thomas began exploring a sale to the NBA Players Union. In June, the two sides signed an agreement to investigate a transaction. In July, as the Pacers' decision approached, former CBA owners publicly complained that money connected to the original purchase remained unpaid. One former owner threatened legal action and openly wondered whether Thomas needed the Pacers' contract to satisfy his obligations. Pacers president Donnie Walsh denied that Indiana money was being used for that purpose. The accusation was not proved. But the public dispute revealed something buyers dislike: uncertainty about debts, deadlines, and ownership rights. On July 20th, the Pacers hired Thomas. Indiana officials said a procedure existed to complete the CBA sale. The NBA initially expected divestiture by training camp and later showed flexibility. No sale closed. The Players' Union did not buy the league. The Pacers did not buy it. The NBA had already been turned down and was moving toward its own system. The business Thomas believed could be worth $20 or $30 million had fewer natural buyers with every passing week. Then came the solution designed to remove the conflict of interest. The CBA was placed in a blind trust. A blind trust sounds safe because it separates the asset from the owner. Thomas could no longer direct league operations while coaching Indiana, but the economic danger did not disappear. He still had money and liabilities tied to the business. The CBA still needed leadership, sponsors, and a buyer. Now the famous owner whose name had sold the vision could not legally take control of the emergency. The blind trust genuinely restricted Thomas. It also existed only because he had accepted the Pacers job before completing a sale. The legal limitation and the business choice belonged to the same chain of events. The blind trust solved Isiah Thomas's conflict with the NBA. It did not solve the CBA's conflict with reality. And in the fall of 2000, that reality began arriving in envelopes, checks, and letters that contradicted one another. The original purchase had not been a simple $10 million wire transfer. Thomas paid approximately $5 million up front. The former owners accepted a note for the remaining balance to be paid in installments. That structure reduced the immediate cash required to take control, but it also meant the people who sold the teams remained creditors of the new league. By the first major installment deadline in September 2000, Thomas had taken the Indiana job. The Players' Union sale had stalled, and former owners said more than $1 million remained unpaid. Then the paperwork became theater. Some sellers received letters saying they would not be paid, followed by checks. Others received checks and then requests not to cash them. Thomas's side argued that the sellers had hidden financial problems. The former owners denied it. A buyer did not need to decide who was morally right. A buyer only needed to see disputed obligations, possible litigation, and a business whose value depended on an NBA partnership that might soon disappear. The sale process became harder at exactly the moment it needed to become easier. Meanwhile, Thomas had begun his first season with the Pacers, Every Indiana game placed him beside Reggie Miller on national television, while CBA teams negotiated payroll, insurance, and travel in the background. This created the image his critics would never forgive. Thomas appeared to have moved upward while the people below him were trapped inside the transaction. The problem was larger than one missed installment. The central office had become more expensive. National sponsorship had not replaced local revenue. The NBA was building a competitor, and the single entity model connected the teams so tightly that weakness in one city could drain cash from another. Under the old structure, a failing owner might lose one club. Under the new structure, central management had to decide which team received the next dollar. By January 2001, those decisions were no longer strategic. They were about survival from one payday to the next. The final weeks of the CBA did not unfold as one dramatic bankruptcy announcement. They came as a sequence of short reprieves. A payroll deadline approached. Money appeared. An insurance payment approached. Another payment arrived. Two possible buyers submitted offers. Neither completed a sale. The NBA made a $400,000 payment a few days early under its existing $2.5 million agreement with the CBA. That early money reportedly helped cover overdue expenses and reach a $291,000 insurance deadline. The league that had rejected an NBA purchase offer was now relying on an early NBA payment to survive the week. The NBA owed that money under a contract. It was not charity. But timing had become everything. The payment did not save the league. It delayed the moment when everyone could see that the league was already out of cash. Local operators became unwilling to take back teams whose obligations they could not measure. Some prepared to join competing leagues. Others stopped believing the season would continue. The blind trust faced an impossible choice. Keep funding 10 teams without a confirmed buyer or attempt to return the clubs to the local groups that had sold them. Thomas could not publicly direct the decision. NBA Commissioner David Stern had restricted his involvement because of the Pacers' job. When reporters asked Thomas about the growing crisis, he said he was not allowed to comment and directed questions toward the NBA. That silence looked like escape, even though the blind trust had genuinely removed his control. But payroll does not care who has legal authority. Players either receive money or they do not. On February 8th, the deadline finally arrived without another rescue. The most devastating number in this story is not 10,300,000 or 4,000. It is 8. 8 of the CBA's 10 teams could not meet player payroll on February 8th, 2001. Travel to future games was uncertain. The league suspended play and announced that the blind trust would return the teams to local ownership. The language suggested an orderly handoff. The reality was closer to abandonment by exhaustion. Some former owners did not believe the teams could operate. Several clubs looked toward the International Basketball League. Others disbanded or searched for any competition willing to take them. The old CBA schedule did not resume. The league said Thomas personally advanced enough money to pay players through their final games. That fact complicates the image of an owner who simply took the Pacers' job and never looked back. It indicates that his money was still being used near the end. It does not erase the collapse. Non-player personnel faced uncertainty. Former executives and operators claimed they were owed hundreds of thousands of dollars. Reports placed the league's debt at no less than $1.5 million. A later investigation described nearly 4,000 creditors, including people seeking back pay, rent, and payment for services. Think about what those figures meant outside a balance sheet. A minor league equipment supplier did not have NBA television money. An arena worker could not replace a missed payment with endorsement income. A local sponsor had paid for games that would not be played. A fan who bought a ticket package had no powerful office protecting the purchase. The collapse traveled downward toward the people least able to absorb it. And that is why the emotional anger toward Thomas lasted longer than the corporate entity. His name had closed the purchase. His vision had convinced local owners to surrender control. His move to the Pacers had triggered the divestiture crisis. He had rejected the NBA's offer. Even if the blind trust made the final decisions, Thomas remained the face printed on every promise. Within days, a former general manager delivered the sentence that defined the backlash. The league had existed for 55 years, he said, and Thomas had ruined it in roughly 12 months. That accusation captured the anger. It also simplified the history. The CBA had been losing teams before Thomas. It had been losing money before Thomas. The NBA had been considering its own minor league before the Pacers hired him. Thomas had not purchased a healthy institution and then introduced the first crisis. The question is not whether Thomas created every weakness. He did not. The question is whether his decisions converted a fragile league into a league that could no longer fail one team at a time. Thomas did not create the CBA's weakness. His decisions concentrated it. The first mistake was structural. Before the sale, each team depended on local ownership. That system was messy and often unsuccessful, but it kept authority near the people selling tickets and sponsorships. Thomas centralized operations in Phoenix. According to the later Sports Illustrated investigation, that move weakened relationships between teams and local businesses. Minor league sports are not miniature national leagues. A sponsor in lacrosse may support a team because the owner sits on the same civic board, shops in the same stores, and can promise a local promotion next week. A national sales office cannot easily reproduce that trust. Thomas replaced local independence before national revenue was ready to replace it. The second mistake was spending. Players reportedly accepted salary reductions, while the central office added expensive executives. The league president received a reported salary of $250,000, plus other benefits. 8 vice presidents averaged approximately $125,000. Those salaries may have been defensible inside a growing national business. Inside a league that had recently lost millions, they increased the amount of cash required before the expansion plan produced anything. The third was the rejected sale. The two sides disagreed about the size of the NBA offer. They did not disagree that Thomas could have recovered his original investment and placed the CBA's function inside the NBA. He refused because he believed the asset was worth more. An owner is allowed to reject a low offer, but once the NBA decided to build its own developmental league, the CBA's strategic value changed. Thomas had treated the NBA as a buyer who needed his product. The NBA proved it could become a competitor and remove the product's most important advantage. The fourth was the Pacers' decision. Thomas knew an NBA coaching job created a conflict with CBA ownership. He accepted the job before a buyer had completed the purchase. The blind trust may have limited his legal power afterward, but the need for that trust resulted from his choice. Malice is irrelevant. Thomas centralized a fragile business, increased its fixed costs, rejected an exit, and removed himself before securing a successor. That is how a league accustomed to losing one team at a time became vulnerable to failing everywhere at once. Those choices explain the collapse. The conditions he inherited explain why it happened so quickly. The CBA was already close to the edge before Thomas signed the purchase agreement. 7 CBA franchises had folded in the previous 2 years. The 9 survivors had lost more than $2 million in the previous season. An employee from one troubled team said 3 clubs remained alive, partly because the Thomas deal was coming. If those clubs had failed, the league might not have had enough teams to continue. Thomas did not purchase a healthy institution and suddenly introduce danger. He purchased a business already approaching the edge. He also improved some early indicators. Attendance and sponsorship revenue reportedly rose about 10% in the opening months. Cities asked about expansion. His rule changes gave scouts better individual evaluation opportunities. His digital plans recognized that online video would change sports distribution. Most important, his central basketball idea was correct. The NBA needed a real development system. Young players needed paid opportunities. Franchises needed direct affiliates. Coaches, officials, trainers, and executives needed a ladder into the NBA. Local markets could support professional basketball below the major league level. The G League now presents those principles as common sense. Thomas understood them before the NBA launched the NBDL. The blind trust genuinely restricted him. The NBA required separation because an Indiana coach could not control the player pool. Once the trust assumed authority, Thomas could not simply order a sale, move cash, or decide which clubs survived. The CBA's own statement said he advanced money for the final player payrolls. By then, the CBA had become a structure no single private owner could easily sustain after the NBA announced a competing league. Thomas lost money trying to keep it alive. The NBA's power was decisive. The CBA had spent years serving the NBA. Its prestige and much of its commercial value came from that relationship. Once the NBA chose to build a fully controlled alternative, the older league faced a competitor with more money, stronger television relationships, and the ability to decide which development system NBA clubs would use. Thomas made the decision not to sell. The NBA made the decision to replace. Both decisions mattered. The claim that Isiah Thomas touched a healthy business and killed it is simply wrong. The CBA was important and vulnerable. Thomas understood the importance better than many people around him. He underestimated the vulnerability and overestimated how much the NBA needed to negotiate. His arrival kept several troubled clubs alive long enough to reach the sale. His execution made the final collapse broader, faster, and more painful. He bought time, then spent it badly. And the clearest evidence arrived only months later, when the NBA opened a new league that looked like a smaller, safer version of the future Thomas had described. In the 2001-02 season, the National Basketball Development League began play with 8 TMs. The NBDL did not purchase the CBA's history. It did not inherit all its cities. It started in a limited region with direct NBA control and none of the confused ownership structure that had trapped Thomas. The old CBA name did return. Some teams and investors acquired assets after the bankruptcy and resumed play under a reconstructed version of the league. But the institutional relationship had changed. The official road to the NBA now belonged to the NBA. Over time, the new league expanded. It became the NBA Development League, then the NBA G League. Direct affiliations grew. NBA franchises assigned young players, developed coaches, tested rules, and built basketball operations close to home. By the 2025-26 season, the G League had 31 TMs. All 30 NBA franchises had an affiliate. The system prepared players, coaches, officials, trainers, and front office staff, almost the same complete ladder Thomas had described at the beginning of 2000. Thomas did not invent every element. CBA executives before him had pursued expansion and affiliations. The NBA had considered development models independently. Baseball and hockey provided obvious examples. What Thomas did was say the quiet future out loud. He pictured a national network rather than a forgotten minor league. He imagined one-to-one relationships with NBA TMs. He discussed a territorial system, digital distribution, multiple competitive levels, and development beyond players alone. He was directionally right. But the G League's growth also demonstrates what his CBA lacked: patient NBA capital, controlled expansion, and a guaranteed connection to every major league organization. The NBA could tolerate years of limited attention because the development function served the larger business. Thomas needed the minor league itself to become profitable while paying for expansion. That difference is not small. It is the entire business. A private owner could see the destination. Only the NBA controlled the road. By rejecting the purchase offer, Thomas gambled that his ownership of the existing league forced the NBA to travel through him. David Stern chose to build around him. The CBA was left between two identities. It was too expensive to survive as a purely local league and too independent to become the NBA's official future. When the money disappeared, the NBA did not lose its development system. It launched another one. Isiah Thomas lost the chance to own the bridge. For most fans, Isiah Thomas's legacy is trapped in the same familiar arguments. The Bad Boys, Michael Jordan, the Dream Team, the walk-off in 1991. Every discussion returns to who hated him, who excluded him, and whether history treated Detroit fairly. The CBA story exposes a different Thomas, a man who did not merely want a place in basketball, but control over the system beneath it. His ambition let him see possibilities other people missed. It also encouraged him to treat warnings as obstacles. 16 months after his purchase became official, 8 of 10 teams could not make payroll. Thomas bears major responsibility for that collapse. He centralized a fragile league, increased its fixed costs, rejected an exit that might have protected his investment, and accepted the Pacers' job before finding a buyer. But he did not create the crisis from nothing. He inherited losses, failing franchises, and an institution already near the edge. His money reportedly helped fund the final games. And the developmental future he described did not vanish with the CBA. The NBA built it without him. Today, every NBA franchise has a G League affiliate. Players, coaches, referees, trainers, and executives climb a ladder remarkably similar to the one Thomas imagined. His name is not attached to it. The CBA's 55 years are not treated as the beginning of that official story. Maybe that was the final price of rejecting the offer. Had Thomas sold, he might have recovered his investment and entered history as the man who carried minor league basketball into the NBA. Instead, he tried to own more of the future and finished with none of it. So was Isiah Thomas a visionary or the man who destroyed the CBA? He was both more and less than either label. He recognized the destination before most people could see it. He simply believed that seeing the destination meant he controlled the route. On February 8, 2001, the payrolls proved otherwise.